what of this can I take away and add to my tool basket?
I
Right?
love
Because
that.
not everything you're doing is all that fantastic. It's not all very interesting sometimes. But if the job is building this Excel model, then you know what? Build it.
Yeah.
Learn this.
Yeah.
And because that, you're going to put in your tool basket.
And welcome to the Growth Minded CFO. We're here today with guest Tatia-Mays Russell, CFO of the Major League Baseball Players Association. Tasha, welcome to the pod. It's so wonderful to have you here.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate you giving me a call.
Of course. Would you mind to kind of introduce yourself a bit and talk a little bit more about who you are and what you do?
I am the CFO for the Major League Baseball Players Association. I've been in the seat for about 4 years now, joined in the pandemic. So my first day on the job was in my house, just with a laptop, in June. So it was at the height of the pandemic. Prior to joining the MLBPA, I was, believe it or not, for about 10 years at the MTA, which is Transportation for New York City. And my role there was around strategic initiatives. There were just a small core of us who were ex-consultants who had strong analytic capabilities and just could take a big problem and boil it down to what the issues were and come up with solutions using data. And I did that leading a small group for the chairman at the MTA.
So cool.
And, they didn't hire me for my transportation prowess. But I do know numbers and I can do, pretty good analysis and work a room in terms of presentation and recommendation. And so that role actually really did prepare me and, talk a bit, at the right time for the job that I'm in now. But prior to that, I was in the sports space. So as CFO of the National Lacrosse League for a while, and I cut my teeth in the sports space at the WNBA,
So cool.
where I joined in 96, 97, in the finance department. And at the time, David Stern, who was commissioner at the time, he was looking to make finance more than just a transactional space, right? Looking to add some strategic mindset. And with the WNBA, just sort of, it was its inaugural season, it needed some additional analytical horsepower there. And so my role in finance was to go over and help the WNBA, with their business operations.
Cool.
And so I did that for about 7 years. One of the best times ever. I mean, I'm just so, sidebar, happy to see that women's sports right now is just taking off in a way that is just goosebumps. So that was my first foray into the sports space. But my initial and original career is as an engineer. I'm a material science engineer, polymer science. Bit of a gearhead, so I did start my career in a lab.
Oh, cool.
Doing, mixing formulations for high temperature coatings for airplanes and wires and things like that. So all good stuff.
Yeah.
But, the story that's sort of going backward. But all of these experiences prepared me for my current seat. I never would have anticipated it, but here I am.
Yeah, that's an incredible story. You've got so many sort of transitions in your career in terms of starting out as a scientist, also being a strategist, entrenched in finance, becoming a CFO, all of these moments of transition. Are there any, within kind of that journey, moments that you recall vividly on, I'm going to make a switch? Was it a conscious switch, or was it often taking opportunity. What was that moment like when you decided to, for example, transition from being a scientist into becoming more analyst, data crunching?
Well, I was working for GE.
Okay.
This was the place to, get a job after, as an engineer.
Yeah.
And because of my particular discipline, material science, it took me to physical locations where, I don't know, I didn't think we're so cool, right?
Oh.
In the middle, in plants or in aerospace, these were very industrial spaces.
Yeah.
I am a city girl born and raised in Brooklyn. Like there was nothing Midwestern or industrial about me, not a thing. So, while I liked what I was doing, where it just took me, physically and from a social perspective, it just didn't really align with who I was at 22. And so around about, maybe 2 or 3 years into my rotations within GE, I decided, I don't think I want to do this way, what to do. And, what do? You don't know what to do at that age, you go back to school. So I went to business school.
Okay.
Right. And that seemed like an interesting opportunity. So I was living in LA at the time, moved to Philly and did the business school thing. And at the time, you were either moving in the management consulting space or you were an iBanker space.
Yep.
Well, interesting thing, like my personal background, like there was none of that in my house or in my family. My mom was a teenage mom. My dad was a teenager. It was just like, what are we going to eat?
Yeah.
So I wasn't clear on like, well, what do you do as an investment banker? Everybody seemed to know. And I do wonder whether or not, whether I should have, but anyway, I didn't.
Yeah, who knows?
I was like, management consulting. This would allow me to use my skills, apply it to different industries, travel a bit, which seems pretty sexy at
when you're young,
time. And so I did go the management consulting route. And upon graduation, joined Deloitte & Touche's management consulting team. Again, another just wonderful experience. Really, don't want to say out of my element, but it was very clear that for me, others in my space had different guidance, right? They had different role models. I didn't have any. And that was a space where just maybe even now to some weird degree that you struggle because
you need that.
I have a dad at home tell me, or an uncle or, and getting, the idea of a mentor, a sponsor or, no one told me any of that.
Yeah.
Right. And so what happened to me is what happens to people who are in that situation. You got some high highs and you got some low lows where, geez, if someone had just told me, to give you an example. I would sit in a meeting and I'm listening, I can hear what you're saying, but as I'm thinking, I would tend to look down while the meeting was going on and I might do something like this.
Right.
And I'll never forget a gentleman by the name of Bill Sod. After the meeting, he was older, and after the one meeting I walked out, and he was annoyed. He said, He says, you keep, every time you're in the meeting, you keep doing this. Stop doing that. He was like kind of like a grandpa kind of guy.
Yeah.
I was like, who's this guy? You know. But he was right. He said, you have to sit up straight. You have to keep your head up straight. Look like you're in the meeting. Stay engaged. Be present. You're doing this. You're the only one like you in the room. Stop that. And fine. It wasn't, his delivery wasn't very nice, but I got the point.
Yeah.
And definitely feel like throughout my career, even had I had a few more of those, things might have been a little different in a couple of places. But so that you asked me about the transition. Not wanting to be in, industrial space, wanting to see how I could still use my analytical tools. Moved into, management consulting space. And that, I think, sort of set me up for for, the ball moving in a different direction.
Yeah. I love sort of the pieces of the story around. So often, I think in our careers, we think about making a transition as this sort of big existential, like, what am I meant to be? But so often more in practicality, it's about, do I like this life? Am I enjoying? I love the idea of like, I just didn't like being in industrial spaces. And that inspired a career trajectory that was wonderful and has been amazing.
It wasn't as planned as
right.
as perhaps it could have been, or maybe it should have been. And but I believe in, I want to say from then on, I believe in just being prepared. I think I must have read that somewhere. Just preparation, right? And so, and wherever you are, whatever the job is or whatever the role is, and where you are accountable for a space, that you are deciding, what of this can I take away and add to my tool basket? Right? Because not everything you're doing is all that fantastic. It's not all very interesting sometimes. But if the job is building this Excel model, then you know what? Build it. Learn this. And because that you're going to put in your tool basket. And then when the thing comes along, because I feel like that's what happened to me, so I wondered, like, why am I in this transportation analytical? Like, I could have done what I was doing anywhere, right, for any business. But this is a 70,000 person business, very complicated logistics, bound by unions and things. So recommendations that you go, well, just do this. Well, no, you have a whole bunch of variables that you need to consider. And it's that kind of experience, right, and the thinking behind that, that I felt like I could present. When the MLBPA sort of found me, and coupled that with the background in sports, and
that's amazing.
That I think really, really helped.
Dasha, one thing that's super interesting with the people that we interview, and the most inspiring CFOs are usually coming from backgrounds that are definitely not the one we're expecting, right?
Sure.
And typically in this case, you're coming from an engineering background. I'm also an engineer by trade and ended up into finance. So I kind of know, I've never been on a plant, but I kind of know what you're talking about. Can you just walk us through, like, you sitting here in this degree with like a lot of people that are probably coming from more like business backgrounds and not necessarily engineering. How does that help you become a better finance professional? Like, and I guess the question I have behind is that my feeling is that it's usually more than only being good at the numbers.
I have more recently gotten very comfortable with just not knowing everything. Right. So this works well for men. Doesn't really work as well for brown girls like me, honestly. Right. But I'm comfortable with it. And I'll do what everybody else does. I don't know everything, but I'm going to hire a team, and somebody here is going to know how to do this. Right. And, you have to have some proficiency. And that's what, age and experience are about. I've, basically surrounded myself with people who have a particular expertise, and I'm comfortable just always wanting to, well, tell me how you do that. Like, you really have to maintain your drive for curiosity and learning. Like, if you lose that, particularly now in finance, which just seems to be like blending with IT and a whole bunch of other things, then you just would serve more as a transactional, you're running a department that's payable and receivables and things like that. But I don't know. Did I answer that question?
Yeah,
exactly?
that's part of it. It's also super interesting for me you talked about what the team that you've hired is bringing to the function, but what do you bring to this team as an engineer?
Oh, isn't it? Well. So currently, just a little bit of background about the MLBPA. It's a smallish kind of place. And if you can imagine, for many years, it had 12 folks, and
Yep.
it was sort of like a mom and pop-ish kind of space. And when I get there, not all of my colleagues were finance people that I inherited. My team were finance people. Like, I know what I had been accustomed to. I'm coming from Deloitte. I'm coming from working with McKinsey people and delivery. And I'm like, okay,
This is different.
This is different.
Yeah.
So part of what I've had to do is like kind of learn from the people who are there. Like, well, tell me how you did it.
Yeah.
And then see where gaps are, and try to build in things. Now, there's a culture that kind of doesn't let you move as fast as you would like. So to my job, what they wanted to, make sure happen was a bit of the strategy piece, right? That it's not a transactional, it had been a transactional place in, prior to my arrival, and to some degree, right? I'm still kind of moving the ball. So my job is to bring a little bit of the big company thinking, a bit of the analytics, to bring, even still today, I'm having to like fight my way to the table. Like, you have a CFO here that knows how to do that, right?
Right.
And because that's just not where I am today. That's just not how they used the previous CFO. Like, that was not her expertise. She was an accountant, and that's what she did very well. And so I am leading in a way that is my intent, anyway, to teach people how to think more broadly, right? And so I've been very visionary in my talks with my team. I've had to shift quite a bit in terms of how I relate with my team, and like, are they seeing this the way I'm seeing it? Right. I'm accustomed to being with people that kind of thinking big, and a lot of cases, no, they weren't, just because that just wasn't their exposure. So what I'm trying to do is, just report different. Some stuff's just pretty basic reporting, and some of the internal controls, and bringing what I've done a lot of is the automation, right? So putting in new ERP systems, like this one isn't going to work because, we're trying to do something different. We've got all kinds of licensing, just based on the business, there are just certain pieces of automation that need to take the place of all this other administrative work, so that we can be more strategic, right? Because we're spending so much time on these other things, and how we can help department heads or, leaders in the company run their business. So what I'm bringing is a way of thinking, a way of supporting decision making, fighting my way to the table. And it's still a fight. You would think that it wouldn't be. It is.
It is still.
Very much. Like awful, honestly. Not that the place is awful, but I just think that people, takes a while for folks to come around to things.
It's funny, as you speak about this experience, I think a lot about, we share kind of it's funny, I also started my career as a software engineer, so a bunch of ex-engineers at the table. I was not a very good one, though. I quickly switched out. But also was a Deloitte consultant and came at the CFO position from very much like an operator strategy background, career sort of chief of staff working alongside CEOs, but then went into finance. And I think there's this very interesting, I've seen a lot of this too, when working with finance folk who grew up in accounting versus those who grew up as operators or finance folks, because we all have a different perspective on our place in the organization and the power of finance. And I think like when you're used to interacting with folks coming from that accounting background, there's so much focus on rigor, on doing things the way that the CPA exam told you to do them, on historical financials and making sure that those are excellent. That's where your kind of focus is early on. So then when it comes to, well, what does it mean for the business? Well, what does it mean for our future? Those lessons are really challenging because they move against the grain of the training of someone who's been really encouraged to look at the past and really keep records and report what is accurate and what is true. Getting someone like that to think about forecasting, which is, putting down on paper something you think is going to happen in the future, is very uncomfortable for someone who has that background. So that transition is interesting. I've seen that struggle too.
Yeah, and how to communicate that, right? So how to get people's heads around it and tell the story.
Yeah.
To say, okay, so here are the various management decisions we need to make going forward. Like, you've seen this.
Yeah.
How do we move forward, right?
Yeah.
I really like your point on being visionary, right? It's rare that we hear a CFO saying, like, I want to be visionary. For people listening to us today, can you share like one example that you have around taking your team that is transactional, as you said, and moving them into, what is one example where you force them to be more visionary in like what they do on the day-to-day? Do you have an example?
Right. So my most recent push, and I say recent, I mean like over the last year, is to think about not providing paper reports and pushing, whatever your report is, your PDF. That department lead can fire up on her computer, what those numbers are, and just, run a few filters and see it themselves. So I almost want to get us out of the business of not maybe having the conversation around, well, what's going on, monthly conversations,
Of course.
what's going on with your operations, but using technology to facilitate those discussions, right? So no more, well, I got to run the monthlies and put this together. Well, no, this is good because it wasn't there before. We're going to do that. But I'm very intentional when purchasing and implementing and rolling out any automation for our licensing revenues, for example. And I mean, and this is sports stuff, but that it has a dashboarding at your desk element to it.
Yeah.
Because we're going to be out of this business soon of running this report for someone. They're going to be able to go on and do it themselves. And so that leads to the next thing, which is, people are like, oh God, I'm communications. I don't want to, I don't want to have to learn. Yep, you're going to have to learn how to log in to whatever it is, DLH, and, put your information in and sort of shift this power in their hands, right? And that, to me, for this organization, is really powerful.
Yeah.
And that's something that doesn't exactly exist where I am today. And so I've been trying to, spending a lot of money and a lot of time to implement certain things, to take things off people's desks, but then to say, here's how we're going to, just really changing the way the place operates, right?
So I think what was super interesting about what you just said earlier was about it's also about empowering the team in some ways, right? Because when you say, it's not about running the report, it's about having access to this information. Would you say that your team, and not the finance team, but your team in general, is more empowered now since the changes that you've implemented because they have access to this information?
They are now feeling, I think, empowered. The word I've been using with my team is having agency and accountability. This is your space. I've even had to just reorganize internally to be very clear about, you are responsible for this space, and why don't you tell me what the deadline is going to be? And just like even having to shift to myself, just because I'm one of those, I want to get right in there and you do this and you go do that. And, I know exactly how I'm seeing it, but that's not what a leader does. And so really, giving people, expecting, right, that they will manage their space. And I think that's a little bit of a, like, I'm supposed to make this decision? Yeah, I'm trusting that you make this decision. And so with that, I'm seeing a shift in just my own team's behavior, right, and how they approach things, and a shift in how I'm leading with folks. Needing to provide the roadmap, right, but so long as you're moving in this direction,
right,
I don't need to be as prescriptive. And so that's been a huge change, in addition to just having to upskill on my team quite a bit, right? So there's a lot of upskilling still that needs to be done, bringing on new talent, trying to develop what's on the team, and where I can do that, I'm trying to do that.
I think it's really inspiring from a CFO perspective to just see your role as this, right? Because of course you need to give the guidance, you need to kind of like hire the team, bring this kind of like career path for them, but on a day-to-day basis, like empowering them. I'm personally a big fan of this book called Turn the Ship Around. I don't know if you've read it, but it's about like basically like how do you give back ownership and responsibility to the teams, and how teams perform better when this is the case, because suddenly everyone starts thinking about like what you just said. I am going to say what is going to be the deadline. And it's this thing around the sentence that is always around I intend to, rather than what am I going to do, like trying to lead by I intend to do this and having your team like react to that. I think what you just said is super interesting, and your role as facilitating this is super, super interesting.
Yeah. In all honesty, because prior to this role, I would say I just worked with a certain kind of A-type kind of person.
Yeah.
Right? We were all kind of these overachiever kind of types, and didn't really have to tell folks that they, what they needed to do and direction they had to. This is sort of not my team that's not who is in this, again, a smaller, mighty on the outside and mighty on the inside, but some of this, this particular space needed a different touch. And I want to say it's not until like right about now where, people are starting to feel it. I've tried a couple of things, and what I was going to say is that I have a coach.
Really?
I have I don't want to call her a career coach. It's not my career, but I meet with my coach every other week.
Oh, cool.
And we talk strategy. We talk, she knows now who all the personalities are, and how I might approach something.
Yeah.
And, here's something that's happening on the team. This is maybe, this is how you need to maybe start to move that. So it's been a little trial and error, but I think I'm in a much better space. And what I'm doing now to empower people and have them see the vision is not going to be the way I'm able to lead all the time. Like I'm going to have to evolve as well.
Yeah.
Like they're evolving. And so, now once we get that part settled, I'll have to, think of some other creative things that keep us not relevant isn't the word, but keep finance top of mind. That it's not the place where you just sort of throw the contract of this is what we did, but like you can't do the contract without the finance person in the room. And that's just not, for this particular organization, that's just not been the culture. Right. And so there's also a culture, space that we are having to negotiate. Like finance doesn't do that, or like, aren't you supposed to do it? No. That's what you do. And That's been challenging because everything has been the same, for a long time. And
Yeah. It speaks to I think so often we talk about the CFO role and we think about what technically needs to happen, the different accounting processes, making investments, ROI calculations, I think. We don't always talk about the aspect of how you shape an organization. But when you're going through kind of these evolutions of finance, of with an organization, how to embed reporting into decision making or how to switch things up, we're really talking about, as you've mentioned, changing the culture of the organization and how it works. And I'm curious, from your experience as a CFO, what are some things that you keep in mind for transforming that organizational culture? What are the things you're working towards or that you think about as you're creating this transformation on your team?
So this is an interesting one because I've sort of tripped over this a couple of times. I guess I thought, well, you guys hired me, you must let's go.
Oh, yeah.
And then?
You must want all the change I bring.
They were like, no. It's like, I liken it to like a little bit like hoarders. I know this is a terrible thing. Like, come and help me clean my house. You're like, okay, like, no, don't touch that.
Yeah.
Not that one. You're like, all right, well, we'll go to that one. No, not that one over there. Like,
yes.
Well, which one do you want to clean up first? Like, and so it can be very frustrating because you came there to bring this, bring this energy, bring this change, and organizations don't work that way, especially small ones. And so I've had like a couple of lumps that my coach had to point out, like, you are not going to change these people like that. And either they're just some things that are just foundational. Yeah. And if you don't like it, you should leave. If you don't like it, you should leave, because that part's not going away. And then there's some stuff you'll be able to wear down over time, right? You can do that by policy, but even that is, this is just the way we operate. Well, what's the staff gonna say? Like, I just don't come from that world. What do you mean what's the staff gonna say? Like, nobody's flying first class. That's what they're gonna say. Sorry, that costs too much. And what do you mean? Like, what do you mean what they're gonna say? Like, do they have a
say?
A say?
Yeah.
Odd to me. Like, that's a real life one.
Yeah.
And so, certainly what I've learned is that whatever organization you go in, you really do have to, either upfront ask as many questions as you can about culture. And people go, oh, tell me about the culture. Nobody's really gonna, you can't get it until you get there.
Yeah.
But be a good study of, like, take it in, observe, and then decide strategically what bits and pieces you're going to impact. What's worth the fight, what's just like you're never gonna, that's just that, and approach it that way. So that's what I've done. So things like T&E policy. Yeah, people like the T&E policy. Like, what do you mean change that? I'm like, well, I'm looking at it. It's not just okay. Yeah. So you change a little piece, and you kind of wear it down, and well, now we have departmental budgets, and we're going to have departmental meetings, and we're going to talk about. And I think people at first were kind of, maybe think it was a little hokey, or maybe it was going to go away. But like, well, what are we going to talk about? Well, guess what? It's on the calendar. Yep. I kind of just made sure that there was a real life process around it. Yeah. Planned it out for the year, so this has become an expectation. Yeah. And putting together formal forecasting processes with templates and guidelines and, meetings and not to overburden things, as folks don't have a lot of time. Right. But to at least formalize some of the work that comes out. Yep. And make people, talk about changing their culture, make people accountable for things, right? And that are not in my shop, right? So, so in that way, making changes to the culture and doing things like having my leadership team go out and do those meetings. So,
Yeah.
in the past it was just a CFO. She was at every, think she was the face. I'm like, oh, you know what? Why don't you run that meeting?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll be there, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe.
You
But
run
that's
it.
your space. You run it. You know what you're talking about.
Yep.
And trying to create even a culture shift on my team and certainly internally that people don't get necessarily used to seeing the CFO all the time.
Right.
And, instilling some sense of confidence in other members of the team that
Right.
may not have just been unknown or, or they just didn't have confidence at all. So I've been trying to come at the culture space and how finance impacts that in different ways that are more broad, hosting, lunch and learns and doing different training. And so, prior to me getting here, we didn't have automated T&E. Everybody was the staples and the tape. Remember that?
Oh,
You taped your
wow.
thing.
Here we go.
Yes,
Yeah.
staples and tape. And so, we put in a system to do this thing automated. Well, you would have thought. I'm like, just go in, and it was like, oh, we can't, don't understand because that. Like, can't we just give you this sheet of paper? No,
Right.
no,
We're not going to work.
Sorry, it's not going to work. I can't do it that way. Right?
Yeah.
And so just getting people accustomed to technology, the fact that they're going to have to learn and be accountable for getting in their submissions and be accountable for getting the proper approvals, and we can see where it is and those kinds of things. So.
In the finance department, we've spoken about it on other interviews where sometimes you get a bit siloed in finance. You're sort of the holder of the books and everyone else is kind of the observer. So that can in itself feel isolating. And then I know as women leaders, that's also can be kind of isolating. And so I heard a couple of examples that you were describing of having a coach, having a community of peers that you go to, having kind of those folks that you can get that second opinion, get some extra information, being hugely powerful, both in informing you, helping you see the situation, and then also just not feeling so isolated, feeling like empowered by other folks in the same situation going through similar things. I know that's also been powerful in my career. What steps have you done to foster those things? How do you seek out a good coach? How do you seek out a good community of peers that you can get kind of that knowledge and have that conversation with?
Well, my coach I got, believe it or not, when I started this role, just because I wanted to lead differently, but I didn't know all of what I was walking into, and I wanted to have a buddy.
Yeah.
To say, an experienced person who, she is a woman of color, and I have some unique challenges.
Yeah.
And so she evolved with me.
Yeah.
The other community spaces for me is one that I'm fostering now is the other CFOs at other unions.
Yeah.
So, where we have these, annual meetups, generally someplace warm in December. We are sharing information that we think might help the other person or, asking questions. Somebody needs help. And so it's really up to the individual to keep those individual relationships going.
Yep.
And I've done that. I have no problem calling someone and asking them. And so part of it is just me. Pick up the phone. Nice to send an email and all that's good, but pick up the phone. Go out to dinner. Grab a drink after work. Just to make sure that there is a just a more social and human aspect to the relationship. Yeah. Then there are some people that I need to do my job. So my auditor. Great relationship with him. I call him all the time. This is what I'm thinking about doing. What do you think about that? Is that going to cause me a problem at the end of the year? And being a union, it's got unique Department of Labor reporting requirements. So we've got LM2s to file and all kinds of other documents. And I can't say I had ever done an LM2 before, and not even fully aware of like how much trouble I could get us in if it wasn't done correctly. So I very much rely on experts. So one of the things that when I got there, I was looking at certain expenses, and because we're a union and our primary job is to make sure that the league is adhering to the CBA, the collectively bargained agreement. That's really our primary job. Right? Make sure they don't go out the lines. And so if you can imagine, like everybody's a lawyer. We've got legal bills that just would, good bit of legal bills. And especially in times of negotiation and coming up on the CBA, there are, different conversations that you need to have and get different kinds of expertise. And I remember saying, we've got to get these legal bills, let's make sure that people just don't pick up the phone and call while, right? Let's make sure that whatever it is we're calling them about is something that makes sense and it's big enough to have to get groom involved and whatever.
Right.
Well, guess what? Hello, if I have a question, I'm on the phone with Weil, and I'm not asking anybody, right? Because my job and what I do depends on the answer. Right. And so, how I form my community is that I'm making sure that, my banker, my auditor, the correct legal counsel on matters, wherever that space is, I just make sure I have a very good, cell phone kind of on a Saturday connection. And that's worked well for me. I've been able to,
I think it's a great piece of advice for, aspiring CFOs and people that are building their career, because something that we've seen like multiple times. First, this is something that we've seen like all inspiring CFOs. They all have a great network. They know a lot of people, and they also take the time. That's something that I often see with like young finance professional. They're super busy. They don't have the time to go out for drinks with some of their peers. They don't have time to call someone to learn about something. And that's sometimes like, very harmful for them, because you just blindsided in some ways, and you miss the point sometimes about, maybe this advice that you're going to get onto one of your phone calls is going to save you like hours down the line, or maybe days, or maybe like a big mistake. And I think that's a super, super, super nice tip for everyone to keep like time to do that.
I get to know. There's one particular, I won't name the firm, but one particular attorney I work with. I really enjoyed talking to this man. He's such a talker. And he goes on and on, how's your family? And everybody's getting next to you. It's like 20 minutes in, we talk about family. I'm like, how much is this call? Right. Let's get down to business.
I was about to say
I just talked away $900. I want to know how your family is next time. Next time we're like straight to
down
business.
To business.
So, you
Not
get
too
it
much time on the phone.
It's like, is this free? Like this, turn the clock off on that. We'll do relationship building off to the side. But I mean, I know it's important for me to get my job done, that these parties will take my call.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, it so goes along the lines of this like growth minded CFO. If you are interested in upping your power in the CFO role, increasing your influence, doing better at your job, your network is so important. It's so much more than just kind of the back office, because there's so much relationship building involved. I know as a fractional CFO, when I first came into this career, I thought I'd be in spreadsheets doing FP&A all day, but it's all relationships. Let me introduce you to this banker. Here's the best lawyer for that kind of thing. Here's an accountant who really knows your industry. It's all about those relationships, bring together the knowledge, bring together the people, and making kind of the right strategic moves with those players in place.
Doing a podcast. Here you go. Who would have thought?
Who would have thought?
That's an amazing way to finish that episode. Thank you so much, Tasha, for coming to us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
It was great learnings and really like a very interesting journey from starting from engineering and to this conclusion. I think it was really, really good. And I'm sure our listeners were very happy to hear that story today.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much for listening to us today. If you like that episode, if you want to encourage us to get more great guests such as Tasha, please just like this episode, share it with your friends, and please give us feedback. That's always very much welcome. And that helps us get more and better episodes for you in the Growth Minded CFO. See you later.
Bye.